So just heads up.
Sick.
Yeah,
All puppies are welcome. Sick. Mick and Lockie, welcome back to the podcast. How you guys doing?
Cheers, mate. Yeah, doing well.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Yeah, good. No complaints. I've got beer.
Always feels awkward introing because we've been speaking for like 45 minutes already, or whatever it was. I think it's short, 30 minutes. So
yeah, this is a record.
New record.
Yeah.
TV.
I'm hungry. I'm trying to keep it short.
Yeah, I'm starving.
We saw a few big bits of news from both of your guys' companies since the last one, I believe. So I guess just a couple. Mick, I think like 2 days afterwards, you launched your front hub.
Yeah, I think
how's that been going?
Well, yeah, it's doing way better than what I anticipated, which is really humbling. It's really nice. So I guess bit of a shout to the loyal customers and whatever that always love making parts. So it's really overwhelmed with the feedback. So it's kind of launched into obviously delivering all of those pre-orders. So it's been real busy, but I think it'd be cool to do that sort of that walkthrough on one of these series too, Darren. So kind of go through and answer any live questions and that.
That'd be sick.
Yeah, I think it's going to be it's going to need at least a couple of hours for that one for sure. It's just for me.
Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely have dinner before that one.
Yeah.
You can see a lot of the pink bike comments, like the gears in their heads started to turn. They weren't quite there, but still trying to figure it out. Pretty good.
Look, yeah, it's I'll be straight up and down. I haven't even looked at one pink bike comment.
I think that's a good way to be. Yeah, I don't think I could look at pink bike comments as something I've ever made because I would just make my brain explode.
Well, look, like just as much for the point that I would feel morally obliged that if I read something and someone's asking a question or having a discussion about something technical to do with one of my designs, like I feel sort of morally obliged to go in and comment or to contact them or whatever. But if I'm honest with you, like I have had hundreds of people message me personally on like my own channel. So I feel as though it's better if I kind of do my best to communicate with them first.
Yeah.
And I can't control comments on a third party platform. Otherwise it would just be a rabbit hole that'd be so deep. Like, if I started commenting there, then, where does it end?
Yeah, it doesn't, mate. It doesn't. I think that's a really good way to do that. I think you've crushed it.
And and likewise too, like obviously if there's something blatantly obvious, like if someone tagged me in something like in a comment or whatever, of course, like I wouldn't ignore it. But it's kind of that thing, like where do you stop? Like there's those kind of there's those kooky Instagram pages, like, I don't know, I'll make one up the top of my head, like Mountain Bikes Are Awesome 101, whatever, that, will reshare your stuff or whatever. And that's kind of the point, like where does it stop? Or do you go to all those ones and answer comments, or do you just do Pink Bike, or do you just do Vital, or so?
You can't get bogged down in that stuff. Like, it's funny, and I put something up, obviously, with the flight attendant release, but it's like, I'll have to find it. It's on my phone, which I got here, but it's like someone commented on something ages ago, and it was like, no one's making you run this stuff. And like, I think that's the biggest thing with any of these. It's like so many people get up there, like up the ante about the price of something or what it does. It's like, you don't have to run this if you don't want. Like, it's really funny. I saw a little bit of that on the WIP stuff, and I was just like, if it serves a purpose for you, buy it. If it doesn't, don't. Like,
and that's kind of half my thinking too, was like obviously legitimate people that were interested in whatever came to my page or contacted me directly or whatever, which is real good. I had a lot of comments of like, oh, this is just O-Chain, and I'm like, no, this isn't O-Chain.
It's really not. Yeah, I still need to put my pre-order in. Actually, I keep thinking to do that, but anyway, that's a different story. Or actually, no, maybe it's not a different story. How do we get onto a pre-order actually?
So what you did there? No, it's all on the website. So cool. It's just under parts store, and then it'll be one of the first tabs. Center Hub pre-order. So just to give people a bit of a heads up, I guess the first batch. So I'm doing in batches of 40 because 40 is pretty achievable for me. So the first batch of 40 was to be deliverable by the end of the year. So that sold in the first day. So I'm trying to, obviously deliver by that due date that I had set. But currently we're into batch 2, which will be delivered early into 2022. And that's the one that's currently open.
That's insane. One day we're expecting that.
Nah.
It didn't sound like when we talked about last time, we were talking price. I don't think you sounded that was going to be the case at all.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's kind of the yin and the yang. Like there was part of me that was like, oh, am I going to sell 100 in the first day or am I going to sell 1? And I've got a pretty conservative nature, so I was like on the side of, I might only sell a couple. So yeah, I was real stoked that people seem to enjoy it. But I think like it's thanks to guys like you two for sharing it and whatever in sort of the lead up. So thanks for doing that.
Didn't do a thing, mate. It's all design. It's just like, honestly, the modular nature and the way you've thought through it just makes me so happy. Like I've seen so many standards over the years, and obviously this accommodates all of them, but I've never seen something so extensively accommodate them so elegantly. Yeah.
Well,
really cool.
like I think, and this should probably be covered in the standalone episode, but to answer it quickly, I mean, first and foremost, like I'm a rider, like,
yeah,
and before the WRP thing, and I probably haven't made this very sort of well known, but the funny thing was like, when I kind of came up with that idea, like I wasn't even into mountain bikes. So I literally kind of like bought a mountain bike because I had this idea that I wanted to adapt. So, I was a uni student, like ground up, I had zero money. So it was like, all right, well, what cranks, like the cranks that came on the mountain bike that I bought were a set of race face. And then I was like, I want SRAM cranks because I want to upgrade the drivetrain. I'm like, well, fuck, like I don't want to have to build a whole new hub. So like, how can I make that modular? And then, I think it was ground up because it was authentic because, I had to write it. But yeah, anyway, I wouldn't necessarily say there was anything like, no great wisdom or anything. I think it's, if you truly ride the products and like develop it that way, then I think you're forced to think authentically. I think that like, and without making it all political like this, but I think there are so many bike companies out there that come into a problem they come at a problem to solve it with an agenda or a narrative. And like, I haven't, like, for instance, like the crank standard, like the direct mount crank standard as an example is crazy.
Yeah. But there's so much, like, and I appreciate it. I love the fact you can. I think a lot of brands, there's so many patents involved with the mountings they can and can't use. Like, that's the hard thing. Obviously, it's a product that's outside of that, so it works. But, like, that's not that I designed drivetrain, I never have. I'm not pretending to, but the biggest limitations I've ever heard on drivetrain are just come down to patents. Like, there's some really crazy stuff where you're just like, oh, that's why they can't just do that idea that seems so logical. Like, and it's awesome that you can, you can make something that works.
Yeah. But I mean, there is one company that makes 3 different size cranks for 12 speed, but we won't go down that route. Speaking of patents and creating new things, though, I did see one that I thought was painted on that new AXS group or AXS suspension system that just came out.
Mm.
The little bleed valves on the back of the fork. I thought that was a Fox thing.
Did you see Fox's post, actually?
Oh, really?
No.
Fox put a post up only like a day or two after the flight attendant launch, and without naming names, I read it as though they were having a dig anyway, put it that way. Because it was a post specifically on their bleeders.
Like, I remember when they launched that that mint color or whatever in the signature colors. There was a lot of shade being thrown from RockShox because Argyle had that pistachio green or whatever it was. So there's always going to be that stuff. But I thought bleeders were on another fork before Fox.
I think so too. I think Boss might have had them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I had a
Boss or Suntour on their downhill forks.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really care for bleeders, but if you feel better about your suspension, cool. I don't know. I feel like the casting ramp and the pressure build up is not that crazy, but I could be wrong.
I don't know, man. Here in the Alps of Adelaide, it gets pretty different.
Well, the thing I don't get, there's more air in a fork, right, than there is in a shock. But theoretically, your shock would need a bleeder as well, and there's no bleeders on shocks. And then, there's a whole host of other things with shocks. But, yeah, if people want them, that's sick. I don't know. I had 40s for years before I worked for Crown RockShox and ran their stuff, and I don't think I ever used them.
Okay. Yeah, right.
But I really comment. I don't know. I've had bleeders on moto forks, but I've always ran RockShox myself. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just commenting from being a sarcastic prick, but because I'm never going to use it. So, but yeah, the new AXS flight attendant
has
relaunched. As I said before, the convo though, that was the least exciting thing for me in those new forks because there's a whole bunch of new tech that was kind of went under the radar.
Yeah, it was surprising. I remember watching Pink Bike's thing and Levy kind of commented on them being standard chassis. And then you watch, there's a really good long thing on Vital. It's 45 minutes and it's like a couch talk. And John Cancelier's on there, who's just awesome. He is RockShox to me. From the product team side, and he just deep dives with them. And there's a heap going on in there, right? Obviously you've got the leaders on the back. You've got what they're calling buttercups in the forks. So they're little elastomers that sit on the bottom of the damper and air shafts. And they absorb a lot of the vibrations that go through the bike that go into your hands. And on that video, I can't remember the guy's name, but the gentleman he's a sound engineer and talks about how he's kind of used that in developing these sound waves or these vibrational waves going through the fork. So that was really exciting for me. That's something I personally really want. I want those internals.
That's actually not to get stuck on that point because I want you to keep going, Lockie. But that's actually I didn't know about that. I haven't watched that video, but that's a really good one because there is a resonance in everything, whether it be your frame or anything. I hadn't really taken that into account before, but I can see why it would work. It's the whole Vibracore thing that Spank has got. And anyway, without getting stuck on that.
Well, and Bontrager made, I don't know, I worked in a track store for years, right? And we had those bar ends that were it was the little metal bit and it had little cutout bits of rubber. And you did the test and shop and you drop a set of bars normally and it was ting, it went for ages. You just did it with the I can't remember what they're called, but I had them for years. You did it with those bar ends. This is on road bikes. And it would just go ting, and that was it. Nothing would resonate through it. And then Bontrager's actually used them on some of their mounts on their older sessions when they had a bit of a vibration problem and a resonation issue in the back of the bikes. So all of the teams are running a very similar little Bontrager bit on their brake mounts for the same reason. So I think it makes a lot of sense. It's such a little thing that would be hard to integrate into a fork, I feel, and keep the same travel. But yeah, it's a really cool little change, but that's only available on flight attendant. So at some point, I presume that would come out, but I don't really know. Obviously, flight attendants like the bee's knees of products, and that's what they want it to be. But yeah, it's some pretty exciting internals.
Yeah, I'm keen. One question I had about flight attendant is on your current fork, technically you have an infinite amount of adjustment, but they've got clicks to indicate where it's sitting. Can you adjust in the app what every, like you got 5 settings, right? Can you change how much that changes for each 5 settings? Because technically there's so many points of adjustment with the motor.
Yeah. So like, first of all, like it's only OE, so I haven't even seen enough in real life or touched it. For what I was looking at on the app, they've increased. So like low speed, you adjust on the app, and then it adjusts the pedal and lockout mode in the app as well, which has a bias as to what you want it to feel like. But there was a greater range on the compression and on the rebound, and I presume that comes from the motor, because I presume the damper is a similar design to a standard damper, just electronically controlled. But I can't remember what the click numbers were, but there was like 2 for each light on there twice around or something. But on that video, they talk about too, like there's an increased range on rebound and on compression. So cool. I would say the increments would potentially be smaller, or it's redesigned. I don't really know.
But yeah, I'm definitely keen to see how it works.
I'm sure they've
low speed compression on my phone. Love to. It sounds so weird, but the amount of times I just like dial that thing on and change it and forget about it and then go back riding somewhere and then I'm like lost the clicks that I'm at would be, I don't know, I'd be really pumped on that. But
I think in general it's just going to make riding easier. The funny thing that I read was everyone just saying that it's just a compression adjuster, and I'm like, yeah, but if you don't have it there, you never touch your compression adjuster. Whereas this is doing it like thousands of times per ride. Like that's your benefit.
Well, like sorry, I'm completely dominating this mix. So if you want to step in,
no, go for it. No, you're the man.
I hate reaching down and putting even a climb switch on. Like I just can't be bothered for the kind of minimal gain you get out of it. And it's probably not even that it's a minimal gain. It's the fact that I'll forget to turn it off. That's what just cracks me with climb switches. I always forget to turn it off, and I'm halfway down a run, and I'm just like, I've been skipping out for like 2 minutes now, or a minute. Let's not say our tracks are too long. And it's just annoying. So I just leave it on all the time, or leave it off all the time. So I get, full compression. I think it'd be nice to have a system where it firms it up for you knowing that. Like, it makes sense.
Yeah, and particularly, adjusting that sensitivity, like you were saying, so you can bias it to either climbing or downhill. Yeah. I think that's, just a quick one on that. I found out the other day that when you were saying you sometimes forget to turn your climb switch off, I think we're all guilty of doing that. EFT, they have a blow-off valve for the oil, like the oil circuit, because they've only got coil. But basically, if you forget to turn your climb switch off, is that it's got like a blow-off. So like if it has a big blunt hit, that basically it'll open the damper, so you don't just have those, if you forget, you just don't have those harsh hits on the downhill. But what I was going to just say off the whole back of that, flight attendant, smart, wireless access system is obviously they've got like the sensor that you slip in your bottom or your crank spindle to detect like when you're pedaling and all of that. And I was just going to say I want to call SRAM out now, because they should have access intelligent shifting with the center hub, because you can shift whenever you want with that. So
you got to talk to your OE account manager, mate. I told you, Dave Evans. Dave Evans. I shouldn't say his name on the podcast because people will find it.
That'll be getting it. Yeah.
Dave is your man. He'll be the man to sort that I like where, obviously I'm completely biased. I should preface that with every podcast I come on to, but it's like, I like the way it's going with more stuff being integrated. I'm not scared of that in a sense of like an Apple way that a lot of people can be, and you're more than entitled to, but I like the fact that more stuff's going to talk together. I think that's really cool on a bike. I
think like first and foremost, like through and through, like I'm a mechanical guy. Like I hate electronics on anything, like, but I'm a fan of flight attendant. I think like they've really done well there, because like the Fox Live valve stuff, like it just looks clunky. But yeah, I think that RockShox really kind of knocked that out of the park. I reckon that's really good.
Yeah, the wireless thing's massive, right? Like it's
huge.
You add more cables onto stuff at any point, and it's a pain in the ass. Like, so
I think they're just on this whole like narrative now with the electronic shifting, electronic dropper. Like, yeah, it all just kind of ties itself in.
Yeah, and it all works. Like, it works really well. There's a dog barking. Sorry. Like it all just works really well. I think that's the other thing. Like they've done so much testing and stuff with it all. Excuse me, come here. Everyone, this is the puppy.
Everyone's going to be forced to watch this, not just listen to it on Spotify.
You're going to need to go pee in a sec. Yeah, like it just works. Like, and I've seen from being at SRAM for 4.5 years, like a lot of this stuff being tested for a long amount of time. And that's the really cool part about it. It's the same with the dropper. Like I genuinely wouldn't buy a different dropper. I'll just buy an Axis one. And yeah, it's going to cost me a shitload of money, especially now, but I can swap it from bike to bike if I need to, you know what I mean? So yeah. Just to play the devil's advocate here, like I said, like I'm a huge fan of this, and I think only time will tell when it comes out, and particularly not just when it comes out to OEM supply, because obviously because it's on, what is it on? Like Giant, Trek, Trek, Specialized, YT, Canyon.
Okay. So like obviously they're going to, and this is what I think they've said, is that they're going to sort of tune the damper and whatever to those bikes.
Yeah.
What I would be interested in, just because I've seen it in other industries, like as an example, right? Like my moto, like I got an EXC 300.
Yeah.
And what was that, like 2017 on or 2018 on? Like they went EFI, and a lot of people prefer the old carby models, because like the EFI, like as an example, like the EFI, like over like a broad bandwidth of riding conditions, like it'll map itself whatever to suit basically anything. But for if you're willing to put the work in and muck around with it and get it dialed, a lot of guys say like the carby one, like the carby models are better, because you can get, if you're willing to tune it, you can get a better product. And I'd be interested to see, and I think that only time will tell, but I'd be interested to see whether that's the same case with the flight attendant, whether for like all these broad ranges of riding conditions, like for the average consumer, it's better. But if you're an elite race team that's like shimming all your stuff and like custom valving and whatever, are you able to get a better product the manual way if you're willing to put the time in? And that's something that I'm really intrigued to see.
Well, if you look at it from an automotive side of things, it's going to be like, if you look at it from cars and race cars and stuff, I can't think of any race cars that have carbies on it, because you just go in and remap from the computer, right? But what I'm saying is like, now, but the thing is, like, in my opinion, like from moto, or whether it's cars or whatever, and maybe we're past this because like we've got electronics so dialed, but there always seems to be a teething period of like 5 or 10 years when electronics come into stuff before it actually like can compete at the top end, like can compete with the mechanical counterpart. But
I think the big thing with this is like, it's been fucking in testing for I think 7 years or 9 years, something ridiculous. And like I saw some early photos like when I started kind of thing at SRAM. So it definitely has actually been tested for that long. I think the big thing with this is like it's just going between your climbing or your pedal platform and your lock threshold. It's not tuning it on the downhills and the descent. So you've still got that option. You can still change the tune. You can do all that stuff. Look, if you're racing downhill, would it be necessary? Would it be necessary? I don't think so. I don't know if maybe you just want something that flicks between on and off. And that's what, like, Charles Murray did that really good video about how he used it. And he was like, the zones, I leave it on. And for the downhills, I just use the override after I do a start. So, like, the downside to it, though, is the damper is more like an RCT3, which was like the rebound compression. So you have low speed rebound, so the R, the C have no numbers after them, so they're just low speed. So low speed rebound, low speed compression, and T3 is 3 thresholds. It works the same as that. You don't get that high speed compression adjustment on it, and that comes down to the tune. So that's where that's. So it would take more time to dial that in if you were changing it and re-shiming it.
The dog just wants high speed compression, mate.
The dog is going high, so I'm gonna have to walk and talk. I'm just scared to piss all over the house.
Either way, it's cool. And Mick just put up a teaser today of something else with Axis, and he won't tell anyone what it is. So. We know it's bar ends. It's all good.
I'm super keen to see this. If it happens and if it works, I'll be stoked. I'm also skeptical, as Mick has heard of me.
It'll work.
I know it'll work. There's no need to like open yourself up to like a Pandora's box. But I'm very excited. Let's leave it at that.
I think we're going to have to maybe make some type of gyroscopic gimbal, but make it work.
Oh, yeah.
I think Mick stacks up Pandora's boxes and then just karate kicks them in his spare time and just lets ideas pour out.
You don't see how many fails we have around here. I fail epically every single day. Just got a bit of an obsession with making parts, so end up popping some stuff out at the end.
You gotta try.
That's the way it goes for everyone.
You don't try shit. You don't learn, right?
What's that?
I said you gotta try stuff. You don't try stuff, you don't learn.
Yeah, well, it kind of like, without making it a discussion about WRP, but like kind of goes back to what we were talking before. I think that when you've got like there are a couple of guys out there that don't have a narrative, but like most companies in the bike industry have an agenda to fill. Whereas if you don't have an agenda to fill, all of a sudden you can look at things with a pretty open mind and kind of go a little bit wild. And it's like any industry, but, I think that, anyway, that's that.
Well, I just remember like Eagle was discovered that way, right? Like some dude just had it sitting on his desk at SRAM because it was something he's mucking around with. And the guys liked it, and that's where it went from there, right? So you got to try those new things and fail every now and then.
I think like the one by Chainring, this is the story I've been told. I haven't seen the original patents, but apparently that was something they've been patented with SRAM. I think possibly even before like SRAM bought Stacks. Yeah, like it was stuff that had been around, just sitting there. So, shh. Sorry, I'm gonna have to keep walking off. I am listening. It's on loudspeaker. It's just the doggo's going crazy.
No, it's all good.
In news from my end, we're relaunching the website and there's some new merch coming. And the reason it's news is because I will be doing a down the rabbit hole design specifically for Mick. So be able to get some down the rabbit hole t-shirts.
Oh, I like it.
Later on down the track.
I might patent that slogan.
Okay.
That should be the podcast name.
Is that you? Yeah, that's true.
Actually,
yeah,
that's a good idea.
I didn't know you worked. Yeah. Done. I'm going to make a note. Yeah, if you patent that, you got to go start working for Specialized, right?
No, it's not a patent anyway. It'd be a trademark.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on to the actual topic for this one. As most people know, we all like building bikes. I think we all built custom bikes, and Lockie's built a couple in his life.
Yeah.
I'm sure Mick has as well. I think he's gone from the ground up, literally.
Yeah, actually, you've done the most from the ground up.
Well, I'll say, like, from the outset, like, I'm not a bike mechanic. I've never been a bike mechanic, so I apologise in advance. Like, there's probably bike mechanics that come on this and be like way more knowledgeable than I am, but I have built a lot of my own bikes, just assemble my own bikes as a consumer, as a racer, I guess. So, like, yeah, built a couple of them, but maybe that might give the listeners a bit more of a realistic expectation. But anyway,
Sure.
I was going to say apologies to any bike mechanics that are sitting there being like, I could explain this way better.
I guess like the main first question is, like, whenever I start a build, I've got like what I want it to end up as. So I want a downhill build, or I want an XC build or something like that. When you're building a bike, Mick, do you have anything in mind from like the get-go?
Oh, that's a really open-ended question. I mean, yeah, it's multifaceted, because, like, say when we built the Trinity, I mean, that's like building a bike. So yeah, absolutely, you've got to have an end goal in mind, because you've got you're designing the thing from ground up. So you really got to have that end goal. On a more local scale, like, if you're buying parts, like if you're buying a frame, fork, whatever, I think that, yeah, absolutely, like, you need some type of agenda. Otherwise, you kind of just get off track and you might have a bit of a bitzer. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most recent one that I built would have been the Meta, like the TR. And for sure, like, I had a couple of trail bikes before then, but I had a relatively good idea of what I wanted. Like, for a lot of the stuff that I ride down here, I don't really need a heap of travel, so I wanted something like around the 140, 150 mark. And I also think that, like, that amount of travel, depending on what you're riding, of course, but I think that amount of travel, like the trail bike I had before that was like a 180 front, 160 back. And the thing is, like, I never even rode my downhill bike because it was so capable, where I was like, well, if I get a 140, like, it'll be better pedaling and all that, but it'll kind of force my hand to actually ride my downhill bike like I did on the weekend, like go up to Bright and take the downhill bike instead. So for sure, like, I came at it with the mindset of, like, I want something in that travel range, like, 140 or whatever. And then the other thing is, I wanted something that I could manipulate a little bit to make a slalom bike. And because we haven't been doing much racing, well, we've been doing really no racing here in Australia for the last little bit, I think I might have put up one or two pictures of that bike sort of as a slalom rig, but I haven't been able to race it or whatever. So apologies, I'm kind of hijacking the conversation here, but so that Meta that I've got, that's a 140 rear, but it's got a you can have it between like 50, 52.5 or a 55 stroke. So at a 50 mil stroke, it's a 127 mil rear. At a 55, it's a 140. So I ran it for a while at 50 mil stroke. So it was a 127 mil rear bike. I actually raced that at Medina at the EWS qualifier, which was stupid, but it was kind of novel.
Why?
So at like 127 rear, 140 front with 27 wheels with my mullet yoke. So it kind of steepens up the head angle, brings the bottom bracket up like about 2/3 to where it would be originally with 29. It's like an epic jump / slalom bike. Like, it's unreal. Probably like the best handling jumping bike I've ever ridden. I just really haven't had the chance to ride it much because, we haven't really had any events to go to, like Green Valleys or anything. So I've kept it like 140 rear, 140 front, and then mullet like 29 front wheel. And I will say, like, I think I might have mentioned this in a previous podcast, but I'm not really a fan of slack head angles, and the metas, in my opinion, are just way too slack. So they normally come with either a 150 or a 160 fork, where I've just kept my fork at 140. I tried at 160 for a little bit, but it was just too raked out. So bringing it down just that 20 mil, just feels more natural. But to the point, I guess, is, like that was the agenda. Like I wanted a trail bike and then something that I could turn into a slalom rig if I wanted to.
With the shock spacing thing, because I get this a lot and I'm just asking a question. I see this happen a lot. People are like, I want less travel because it'll pedal better, right? But like with that shock, why wouldn't you just change your sag and leave the spacer in?
Well, it's multifaceted.
Because it doesn't change the travel. At the stroke's the same. The eye to eye is the same, and the stroke's just restricted at the end.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. So that's it. Like the 140 just gives you more stroke at the end. I guess my thinking is like I could run it like pretty well the same, like with like the slalom rig. It would just not like blow through, like it just wouldn't find that bottom. It would kind of just, it would bottom out, like it would harden up. Whereas the 140 just gives you that little bit extra. And then there's more to that too with like, I would actually change the settings. Like I wouldn't just put more air in. Like I had like Connor Hunter made up what he was calling the thick boys, like volume spacers. And I ran it, I tested it riding some like enduro tracks, and it was just too harsh, but I've still got a set, and like absolutely that's what I'd run for slalom. And it's the thick boy spacer is equivalent to 5 tokens, so it's rampy as fuck. Like you would never ride downhill on that. But my point is, like with a 50 mil stroke with a huge volume spacer in there, so it's just super progressive, like it pedals unreal, and just super poppy, so it jumps real good. Whereas like 140 with like 2 spacers in just feels nice. So it's not just like, you're right, Lockie, in principle, like, why wouldn't you just run it at like the 140? But if you're changing sort of the chamber to kind of compensate and whatever, I think it can be kind of cool. But it all just kind of depends. But
like for sure, I'm not saying one's right or wrong. I just find it really interesting. A lot of people look at travel and reducing that, making the bike pedal better. And realistically, all it's changing is a spacer and the sag gradients on the shock. So a lot of time you can change your sag for the same thing. With the tuning side, 100%, and that's what I would do, the exact same thing. I would just put a bunch of tokens in the thing and make it ramp up. But it's I think it's just interesting how people look at travel. I don't think travel ever really depicts how a bike's going to pedal. Just because it's less travel doesn't make an XC bike.
Well, and that's like on that point, I guess, is that like, so say for instance, like a lot of my mullet yokes, by basically, because what a mullet yoke does is like, obviously your shock stays the same eye to eye, but by having a yoke, like you've effectively got like a long eye to eye. So by making that yoke longer to push the axle down, you've effectively now, like, just say for layman's terms, let's just say your yoke is now 5 mil longer and stock you ran a 50 mil stroke. It means that you could go up to a 55 mil stroke now. Like, again, this is kind of layman's terms, but like the likelihood is you could go up to 55 stroke and still not like have any clearance issues with your tire rubbing the seat tube and all that type of stuff. And I have a lot of customers say to me like, but if I don't make it a 55 mil stroke, say in that case, wouldn't it pedal worse? And I'm like, nah, Like,
No.
it's just going to give you more at the bottom. Like,
Yeah.
100%. Like, yeah, do it.
No, it's just my thought. My thought is I hear it a lot. I've change this stroke spacer and put this in. It's going to pedal better. It's like, well, I'd probably just leave it as is and just put more air in it. But it's a different thing. But I suppose back to your question, Darren, like when building a bike, I weirdly always have no, that's all good. Like I weirdly have like a theme or like a specific track that I want it to ride or like something that I want it to do. So like my trans build and same really with the Habit was like that's going to be my trans Taz bike. Something that's like 130 at the back, 140, 150, but really focusing on angles. Like I look at angles way more than travel because I think that's really important. I think a lot of small travel bikes can cop a bit of flack for being less travel, but like they actually ride well because of the angles. And it's kind of like a double-edged sword of, there's not many shorter travel bikes that have aggressive angles because no one wants shorter travel with aggressive angles. But once you start to get some slacker bikes with lesser travel, they can actually work quite well. But yeah, I always have like a bit of a theme in mind. It's weird, but I really enjoy building a bike that way.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of design this question around you because, like your roadie bikes, your mountain bikes, everything always ends up looking really dialed because you've kind of gone at it with this idea in mind.
Yeah. I just find it fun. I feel like there's like, it's probably because I built a lot of bikes. I just like to have a bit of meaning to them, I suppose. It probably doesn't actually make a difference at the end of the day, but yeah.
It definitely makes you want to ride it more. That's for sure.
Yeah. It's got a purpose.
Actually, on the short travel with good angles things, a few of my mates have their a transition spur, and those things. They are sick, and a lot of them aren't even riding their enduro bikes around here anymore. Like they just ride them because they're so dialed. Yeah,
I had a similar-ish setup to one of those on a Giant I had as well. So it was a trans, the 29er trans, which was in a bit of a weird spot, that bike, in my opinion. But I ended up putting a SID on that and a SID Lux and kind of made it into like 100 mil at the back, 120 bike. But it had like I'd like to say a 65-degree head angle, but I can't remember what it was now. Maybe it was 64 and a half. No, it would have been 65 at least. But yeah, it was so fun. It was so fun, but I'd never ridden a bike with that short of travel with those angles. I think that's where, a lot of these new like down country bikes are blowing a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, Well, I'm at the opposite end right now because I'm building up a 515 reach 63.5 inch. Trail bike.
Oh yeah,
it's a big goal.
This is sorry to butt in, but this is kind of what I was saying before. For anyone that doesn't follow Bubba Warren, he's from the US, but he was building like the sickest dual slalom bikes, like Evils. So he built an Evil following. I'm not sure what travel the followings are normally. Just they would be around the 130. Yeah, okay.
140. Yes.
Yep. So I've been on my phone, but I've been looking for this photo. But that's one, I don't know if you can see it, but that's a following slalom bike that he had at Rotorua, and it was a beast. Like it was so sick.
Yeah, I think so.
And seeing him ride it, like it was unreal too. And that kind of gave a bit of.
So excited. Sorry.
Say that again. Sorry.
Slalom bikes, and like Nico Mullally does awesome like Franken builds and stuff too. Like those Franken builds and fit for purpose, but especially slalom bikes get me so excited. Like Cody Kelly's one that went up on Pit Bike the other day. I was just like, yes, like these are cool.
Yeah. And so that following, that kind of gave a bit of an inspo to the Meta TR that I built and I think there's kind of some clout to this as well. Is like dirt jump, like slalom's kind of in this middle ground where like I've ridden dirt jump, like, my dirt jumper kind of with a bigger front tire and whatever in some slalom. And sometimes it's really good depending on the course, like if it's really smooth. Sometimes it can be a pain in the ass. But I think a lot of guys end up riding like a slammed trail bike just because they ride their trail bike so often, like it's familiar to them and all of that. Like obviously it's got to be good for the course, but if it's good for the course, a slammed trail bike, certainly feels familiar. But And that's what I wanted. Like I wanted one bike, like let's say if I was going somewhere, like, I don't know, like, for instance, like I plan to go to the US Open and they have slalom there, which is like pretty blown out course or whatever, is I wanted to be able to take like one bike that I could just like change a wheel set over or like slam the suspension or whatever and be able to do both. So.
Yeah. Well, I remember like back in the day looking at like you had like this Specialized SX. I remember Black Market had this 6 slalom frame. Like all those slalom bikes back in the day, they were just like little cross-country things that would just whip around. I always wanted one.
I was so sick, man. Like, yeah, slalom bikes get me so excited. I just can't really say that enough. Like, especially when you start seeing like ceramic things in them and stuff. Like, I remember riding this wasn't a slalom. Actually, I think it was a slalom bike, but Connor had used for Crankworks that Maddie had built up, and there was 2 of them. They were matching dirt jumpers. One was like full ceramic bearings, ceramic bottom bracket, and this is when I first realized about using like good bearings and stuff. It wasn't that they were ceramic, they were just good. But like the lap times at Bromont pump track on the things between the 2 bikes was insane. You know what I mean? And one was just like this, you know, it was a $300 bottom bracket in this bike, right? But it was just fit for purpose and it was fast. It was sick.
While we're talking about bottom brackets and stuff, we'll move on to the next kind of thing. And you've already talked about this a bit, Mick, but when you're building the bike, how do you go about navigating like standards and stuff like that? Do you ever have to change what parts you're running for a standard, or do you try to just run the best stuff possible?
Again, like typical bike industry, because there's so many standards, I think that's a multifaceted question. I mean, it kind of depends. Like if there's a certain narrative of bike that I want to build up, like obviously I'll make a compromise if there's only a certain standard that can be ran on that certain frame. Like for instance, like the Meta TR as an example, like that's press fit bottom bracket. So it's like, even if I preferred thread, like a threaded bottom bracket, then like, so what, it's not an option. So yeah, it's kind of a multifaceted question. I mean, yeah, I definitely make the compromise to get the desired build at the end. If that means swapping a standard because it's going to mean it fits that narrative of the build, like, yeah, I'll sort of certainly do it. But there's also sort of non-negotiables as well, I guess. And then to take it to another level, you know, there are guys out there that are, you know, well, you don't even have to be like full pro, like even sort of if you're on like ambassador deals or whatever, I guess you could be tied in a lot of the time just to componentry sponsors. Like you might want to run, ideally, you might want to run something that your sponsor doesn't offer. So you have to make a compromise there. So yeah, anyway, I guess in short for me, like, yeah, I tried to sort of, like I was saying, sort of define the build that I want to achieve and kind of build around that. But
I think the sponsored riders get really good with the Sharpie sometimes, for sure, as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's getting less and less, but it depends on what it is. But yeah, it's true. What would be something that's like you were saying before, Mick, like what's something you would have to go with? You know what I mean? Like what's the things you couldn't change? Like,
well, it has to be a WRP stem.
Okay, yeah. It's just so like little things like that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like, honestly, it's just kind of little intricacies. I mean,
yeah.
And again, like I've always been this way too, like even in BMX and whatever, like I've always kind of liked having the ability to be pretty fluid with parts, because I mean, this is a rabbit hole, but like I feel as though so many people, like so many athletes, kind of sell out just, I don't know, just to try to get free shit, which, yeah, I'm just not the biggest fan of. Like I'd much prefer just to spend my own money and ride what I want to ride, rather than like have to put on social media like, oh, this is the best frame I've ever ridden, and in fact it's a piece of shit. So yeah, I don't know. Like in that regard, I guess I've always been pretty fluid with what I ride because, you know, whatever is sort of the best componentry of the day I want to be able to ride. But having sort of non-negotiables, like it really just depends on the build. Like it's such an open-ended thing. Like for instance, like with the Meta TR, just as an example, like I'm a big fan of consistency, put it that way. Like even being really fluid with the parts that I ride. I'm a big fan of consistency. So like the Meta TR has got Shimano everything, but I've always been a big fan of, I've never had anything but like RockShox suspension. So like, for instance, I would never run, say, like a Fox 40 up front and a Super Deluxe at the back. Like that makes my OCD just go wild. Like that's a non-negotiable for me. And like another thing is like it's the same. Like I think we talked about this last time, but even like drivetrain, like I would never run, say, like I'd always run one brand of group set. You know, like I'm not a big fan of like mixing that up. Like it's not. Yeah, I can't put my finger on why. I'm just not a big fan of mixing it up.
Does that mean there's going to be some WRP handlebars coming on soon? Because, man.
Nah.
It's fine. It's fine mixing. This is my rule with mixing. I learned this from one of my mates painting, but it's like if that company doesn't make another matching thing, that's totally cool. Yep. But if they do, then you have to run it. That's my rule with stuff as well.
Yeah. I mean, of course, like you can have like tweaky bits that are kind of like look cool, whatever, like might be little intricacies, but like, yeah, the big stuff like drivetrain, suspension, that type of stuff, I'm just not a fan of mix and matching.
Yeah.
Like they're kind of the non-negotiables. And like, you know, if I'm building a bike and I feel as though like there is a certain, if I'm building a bike and I feel as though there's going to be a certain component of that bike that's going to be like, it's going to make the build. Like, let's just say, like, I'll give you a hypothetical example, right? So let's just say, for instance, I was building a downhill bike and I wanted a certain crank setup, and the only person that offered that crank setup was like SRAM. But there are a whole heap of companies that offered everything else, like the drivetrain and whatever, but the non-negotiable was to have that SRAM set of cranks. Like, yeah, I'd deck the rest of the bike out in SRAM.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific parts you run, Lockie, or is there anything like you run other than SRAM, obviously? But
yeah, obviously everything's SRAM, so that kind of takes a lot out. But that's like a non-negotiable at the same time. And that's not because I work out, it's just from the support we used to get from them as a team. But not really. Like, yeah, I've kind of changed my bars over a little bit, which will remain nameless. Grips are a big one. Like, not that any of that's a standard, but like I just need to. Like, I really like DMR grips. Yeah, there's really nothing particular that I particularly care about. Really, as long as it's not a wacky rear end. I don't want to run Super Boost because it's just too hard. The Cannondale stuff I've got my head around, so that's okay. Like dishing a wheel is not in the world. But yeah, I don't want Super Boost. I don't want non-boost. I just need to grab my dog before we piss on the carpet. But yeah, like nothing crazy really. Like as long as I can run. And steerer. If it's got to be a 1-on-1 steerer, which is not really applicable to mountain, but to road. That's a big one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That stupid OD2.
And probably to have like proper chain guide mounts or like bash plate mounts. That'd be a big one. I hate dodgy bash guards.
Yeah.
I'm grabbing my dog.
I agree. I agree with the grips though. So I run like Sensus meaty paws because they're the only grips that don't give me arm pump because they're extra thick. Yeah.
I'm a big grip fan. On this like Sensus, I love Sensus. Like the light, like Sensus light. I run them on pretty well, everything. And, well, not my dirt jumper, just because, like, you don't really get much of a hand workout on the dirt jumper, but I would if I could. But, yeah, I love them. Like, I rode it bright this weekend, just gone, like, 2 days. The Sunday was pissing rain the whole day, and I rode gloveless the whole time and didn't get sore hands once. Love it.
Yeah, I literally take spare gloves like when we could travel. But like if I've gone to trips to other SRAM locations, it's like I take my own grips. I can't deal with that.
One thing I will say around like the choosing of components and stuff, it does come from like the company culture and the support as well. Like one of the main reasons I run rock shocks and SRAM is if I blow up a Fox shock at an event, I'm fucked. Like that's not. Yeah,
that's where my relationship with SRAM started. Like I wanted to start up a team to try and help juniors go overseas and race. And SRAM were like, yeah, we'll support you and like we'll service your stuff and we'll have it back to you like the next day. Like it was huge. And at the time I was dealing with, and it's still the same what I hear, you know, a 2 to 3 month lead time on suspension service from other people. It's just like, well, that's why I'm going with that. You know, it's not because I work there. It's the service and the reliability. It's huge.
So when we're talking about components and stuff like that, do you guys, this is just a personal question because I did an article for it in Revo the other day, but do you guys buy full wheel sets or are you building them up yourself from like hub, spoke and rim?
I always build them up.
Yourself?
No, well, I'll give Dave Habich a shout. I always get Dave to do them because I think he just builds a good wheel. I built a couple myself. I built a set of DTs, so 350s to 471s. Probably would have been, I don't know, just over a year ago, I guess. I guess like while we're on that point, I'm just a fan of that combo, like DTs and 471s with DT spokes. Like I just run on everything because the wheels always feel the same. Which is good. I just like that combo. But yeah, I normally get Dave Habich to build them. He's just a real good wheel builder. I've never had anything go. I've had a couple of other people build wheels and like they've always gone flimsy or whatever, whereas his wheels always seem to be good. So it's just tried and true.
Unintended.
I hate building wheels. I just bought, this isn't a plug because I paid for them. Bought some wheels for that rail company up in Sydney. Up, which I'm pretty stoked to see. But now I'm thinking about it. Maybe I need to change my hubs because I need to have DTs for the center hub. That's a different kettle of fish. But yeah, wheels.
Well, you can zip tie. You can zip tie them.
Yeah, like I've got industry 9s ordered and they're polished. And I think I should go with them. But yeah. So yeah, I hate building wheels. I hate doing the spoke lengths. It's the biggest thing. I ran and will always run zip motor wheels. I'm a massive fan of them as well. And Andy from SRAM builds them up and he's just an awesome wheel builder. It's one of those guys who like doesn't talk about his wheel building and just does an amazing job. And then road wheels, shifter, Dan, superb Velo bicycle is like my road wheel person. I just got my 808s built up by him and they're amazing. So yeah, I have different people for different wheels, but I don't trust myself with such things.
Road wheels make a huge difference.
Oh, man.
Road wheels, I was blown away.
I got another set of stock wheels, which had sat around for a while and they're creaking a bit, and they're just stock spoke tension. But when I messaged Dan about the hub, so I managed, it's a long story, I won't get into the road too much, but had some wheels, had to change the hubs. And I was like, just chuck some standard spokes in. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be easier. And Dan's like, no, you need to have it bladed. He's like, because the non-drive side runs less tension on these wheels and because it's going away for this and this and you're racing it out of corners, it needs to have this. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool. And like, they're just silent wheels and they're stiff, but they're still a bit compliant. Anyway, he's the man. I think there's people out there who are way smarter than me, especially in wheels. And yeah, I get other people to build them. But for the most part, they're custom, I suppose. They wouldn't be a stock off-the-shelf wheel. Even the zips I get through Shimano have always been custom built.
Yeah, I think like on that point, like everyone's different, I guess. But in my opinion, I reckon if you're like serious and you're going through wheels, particularly if you like racing downhill enduro and you're going through rims, and you don't want to do it yourself, I actually think it's one of the wisest decisions to like have a trusted wheel builder.
Oh yeah. So this Railed company, again, I haven't used them. They're based in Sydney. Lovely guys. It's like, I think it's $150 if I wreck a rim, and they'll fix it. I'm pretty sure it's a number. I could be completely wrong with this. Maybe I read it wrong, but like that's pretty sick. You know what I mean? Like you will wreck rims at some point, but then at the other side of it is like you can get wheel builders. Like I've done wheel builds, I just don't like doing them. You can get wheel builders that just tension the fuck out of your spokes, and it's not right for that wheel. It's or slight over tension. That's where you can get issues as well. So I think you're right. A trusted wheel builder is pretty key. Someone who has a spoke tension meter is probably pretty key as well. I've seen a lot of bike shops that don't have those.
Yeah, bike shop should definitely have one, 100%. I build my wheels just because I like to see what goes wrong.
Yeah.
And I really love building wheels. Like I love putting music on and just chilling. In saying that though, spoke lengths, if anyone wants some 294 spoke DT comp spokes that are too long for the wheels I just built, you can have them.
Oh, actually, you know what is an absolute has to happen for my wheels though? They have to be brass nipples. I don't care. Like that's the one big thing. I'm not running alloy nipples. They're brass nipples and that's it.
But I think most people would say that too.
Yeah. But I think that's the difference with like stock wheels generally have alloy nipples.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like it's little intricacies like that where, for the most part, like buying complete wheel sets, you just don't get. You know, like even for instance, like I remember I bought a bike a while ago that had a complete set of DTs on it, like from factory, whatever they were, like the 2150s or whatever. And like even as an example, like if you like pull the rim tape off, like I'll make a number up, but let's just say they spec the spokes to the nearest 5 mil. So like you pull the rim tape off and like every second spoke was showing through a lot more than the every other second spoke, if you know what I mean. Whereas like, yeah, I mean, if you get your wheel built, you can get the spoke to the nearest millimeter. Like, you know, particularly like if you get it built by someone with a spoke cutting tool. You know, so just little things like that, which then leads into being more easy to get the wheel balanced and like all of that. So yeah, I'm just a big fan of building them from scratch.
It's the same with, I think the same thing runs true for a bike, right? Like, you know, you get a bike from any of the major manufacturers from the factory and like they're okay. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not amazing. It's not super silent. I mean, like, you know, it'll develop that bit of creak here or there, or it doesn't have enough grease. Like there's grease quotas. Like it's not made like, as they say in like Italian families, like with the love. I think that's the same thing should be said for wheels. You know, like you want someone building that wheel who's thinking in the mindset of this is what I'm going to do to this wheel, so it needs to work like X, Y, Z, as opposed to like I need to build 1,000 of these today or I don't get paid. That's.
Well, I think on a tangent like that's, I guess some shops where you know they're just pumping out bike builds for the floor and stuff like that. You miss certain things. Whereas if I'm building a bike, like even the Marin I've taken every shock bolt out, I've taken every pivot out and re-lubed it all and made sure it's all to what I like. So
yeah,
it makes all the difference. Like that's what we used to do in the shop I used to work in Sydney and Bellyfix. We'd take the bikes apart and put them back together. And it made such a difference because you wouldn't have people coming in for that known issue of such and such a part creaking in 3 months' time because you did it up front. You know what I mean? That's what I learned from working overseas on race bikes. It's like you need to grease that bolt to get the right torque for it not to come loose. Because if you just wing it, it's going to come out. And for the average rider, it's not in the world. But if someone's spent, 10 grand to get overseas, and the derailleur bolt comes out and you put Loctite on it. Like, it's the stuff you learn from seeing it go wrong.
100%.
Or like sorry, this is my last alternative, but the other thing I do on my bikes is I get them ready for Medina because that's where I always go riding with them. So I Medina proof them, and I Medina proof them by, taking all the bearing covers off, taking the seals off, and then using like Morgan Blue Aquaproof paste. That stuff is like Jesus grease. It's amazing. And it makes such a difference.
I think on that point, if you can make a derailleur last 2 weeks in Medina, you're doing real good.
Yeah, like my Axis derailleurs there have been sweet. I don't think I've ever actually run a... Actually, that's a lie.
Of course, because they're Axis.
I had an SX derailleur I had down there before SX came out, and it was amazing the whole time, weirdly. But yeah, Axis is fine. Do you mean from a cable standpoint or from like a just blowing out standpoint?
Well, so when I did that earlier in the year, they had the EWS qualifier down there, like the Enduro before the Nationals. And I had like a full XT group. Got back and just like did a full strip down, like pulled the clutch out of the derailleur, like everything. Put it all back together, and like, don't get me wrong, like it was relatively good, but me, I'm like, no, fuck this. I'm just buying a new derailleur and new cassette and just having it new again. Because like, that place is brutal. I reckon it's probably the most brutal riding sort of park, other than like, stuff outside of a park, like true backcountry stuff. But like, when it's wet, it's bloody brutal. It just gets in everywhere. So while I was there, I was like, no, stuff it. I'll just like, new cable, new derailleur, just do it.
A certain pro down there on an e-bike told me he went through like a couple of cassettes, 4 chains, like 3 or 4 sets of brakes in the week. Like, it was insane. And tires. Yeah. You definitely need to prepare your bike.
If I'm there for a week, it'd be like, depending on the weather, but it's like 3 brake pad sets, depending on how much descending you're doing, at least. You just need to clean the thing out. The dirt down there, as you're saying, is so unique. Like, it's so fine, and the way it gets into everything is just insane. So if you need to waterproof it, or it just gets in, like it kills stuff. I didn't believe it the first time I went down there. Like, I was helping them out with the fleet with SRAM, and I was like, oh yeah, these bikes are still dirty. Like, I just need to clean them. And then I realized with my own bike a few days later, I was like, it's really hard to actually clean these.
For sure. I think like on that point too, like anyone that's going to go to Medina, like I took a lot of spares. Like basically I've got these like stackable shelves like for WRP, and basically I just stacked 4 of them, like 4 shelves worth of tools and just spares and whatever. And like I had a couple of spares for everything but brake pads. And like, don't get me wrong, like I took a lot of brake pads, but the joint just fries pads. Like, I don't know how many sets I took, like 10.
I think the water just acts as like a grinding paste when it gets on those discs and just cooks everything. Do you guys have like I mean, you might be a bit different because you built up the meta, but like for me, even if I had an XC bike or a lightweight bike, I like really good brakes, I'd still run Code RSCs. Do you guys change your brakes per bike, or do you kind of just run the most powerful things possible?
I used to, because I used to be in the same boat. Like, I want consistent braking all the time. But then I realized that I was building my bikes to do things that they shouldn't do. So that's kind of what happened with like the trans, like especially with the Habit. I was like, oh, I should put this on and put big rotors on and do this. And I was like, hold on a minute. That's for the big bike. The big bike can get the 220s. This bike's getting 180s and G2s. And it kind of changes it. So I think if I'm building up for a specific purpose, then I would downspec it. If I'm building up a bike to be a minute downhill bike, then I would run the same brakes.
I'm a fan of big brakes. Like, I hate finding myself in positions where I'm not able to stop. So I'm a fan of big brakes on everything. There's two parts to it. There's a few parts to it actually. So, for instance, like on my dirt jumper, it's got like an old set of Avids, like what I don't even know, like DB3s or something like that, Lockie. But anyway, like they're just single pot. For instance, like single pot brake, whatever, twin pot, but like for instance, like a 4-piston Shimano XT is lighter because it's a better, it's a whole better system. So a lot of people will think like, like twin piston brake, like I'll save some weight, like you might, but do your research beforehand because a lot of the time you might not. I'm a fan of big brakes, and then like my enduro bike's pretty well got downhill brakes, like 200mm rotors or whatever. But I'm more inclined, like say my dirt jumper, for instance, like XT brakes just with a small rotor. Fuck it, I've got the power there if I need. It's just got a smaller rotor. So like you would notice if you're doing downhills, like it would heat up real quick, but the weight and the rotational sort of inertia is just saved in the small rotor. The little bit of extra weight I've got like in the caliper, so what? Like I'd just rather have the power there. But the second part that I was going to say is I've seen it like kind of often with people. They're like, oh, I need bigger brakes or whatever. And I think half the reason they're saying that is because their current brake set just isn't well maintained.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's like, well, you're fine on a set of G2s and 180 rotors if it was well maintained. Like, doesn't matter how big your rotors are and how huge your your master cylinder is, and you could have 6-pot brakes, but if it's not well maintained, like it's not going to fucking slow down.
Oh, brake maintenance is every event I've ever worked for the last 6 years. Like, no one bleeds their brakes, and it's such a cheap thing to do. And it's not, if you're at that level of enjoying your riding and daily thing, it's every couple of months, just do it. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much we get into with brake fluid, the way they work and the way they break down, like, and the way dot fluid is in the sense of being hydroscopic. Like, just stay on top of the maintenance and it will work so much better. The same can be said for Shimano brakes. The amount of brakes I've pulled apart and there's just black in them, and that's lowered your boiling point. That's changing the way it's going to break, and the bite point's going to change. So,
for sure, like I take my bleeding kit literally everywhere with me now, like, because, like I said, like if there was one thing on a mountain bike that, or on any bike that like I pick up on straight away is brakes. Like, suspension can be a little bit off, or geo can be a little bit off, or whatever, but like the brakes is non-negotiable with me. I'm just like, nah, I have to be able to stop the thing.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of stopping.
I think like the second thing is, I don't know what you think of this, Lockie, but like, and I was kind of a little bit the same too, because like, I came just from sort of BMX background, and particularly at that, like disc has kind of come into BMX now, but like only recently. Like I was just cable guy, and I was kind of a little bit intimidated by like the whole hydraulic brake thing, particularly with like multiple standards and like dot fluid, mineral fluid, like all that type of stuff. But I think for any kids that are into races or whatever, I think it should almost be a little bit of a prerequisite that dads at the races or whatever, like teach your young kids how to bleed brakes, because it's so overlooked, but can be the biggest advantage.
It's super easy.
Oh man,
it's super easy once you know, but it's so intimidating.
Online. Yeah, I do get it. Like, I think now that there's so much. I remember watching the first bleed video on how to bleed a set of Avid brakes when I was 18, and it was like this real old school video, you know what I mean? And I think Herc, who's still at Ruckshock, who's amazing, did that, and it was like, but it was a lot to it, right? You had degas fluid, you had your stuff, all that stuff's gone now. Like, and now with that bleeding edge port and the way that the actual this is fully SRAM centric, the way the fluid path works in the calipers, like it's so easy. You just literally flush from one to the other, and there's like a clean bleed port. And it's really, really straightforward. And look, you might fuck it up, and it might be an expensive fuck up, but like it's kind of hard to really fuck it up now. Or if not, just the importance of telling your kids to go to the shop and having that pre-race maintenance done, which easier said than done.
I think in a way I was lucky because I had Haze 9 at a certain point, so I just got to bleed my brakes all the time. It was sick. It got me really good at it. But yes, I was woken up to a phone call at 7:30 a.m. on Saturday to a mate. It's just like, I'm going shuttles. Just realised my brake just pulls to the bar. You could have looked at that yesterday. Like, it's just a prep thing. So,
hey, that's the biggest cracking thing ever. It's like you spent all this money going to a race and you didn't get some maintenance done or whatever. But that's a different pet peeve for a different day.
Might move on to some drivetrain stuff as well. Just now, I'll skip through it a little bit. Do you guys?
I was going to say, how hungry are you getting?
Pretty. What length cranks do you guys run? Did you guys pick your own crank length?
I am. And again, it depends on bike a bit. There's been a lot of research into this too, which I think, like, without going down another rabbit hole, should be sort of just touched on a little bit. Like, for instance, BMX, like I kind of mixed up a little bit. Like the general rule of thumb, like over my BMX time was 175s. That felt natural. I messed around with 177 and a halves for a little bit, ran 180s for a little bit. And again, it was track dependent too, because like a really flat hill, 180s, longer leverage, so more torque, didn't have to spin it up. Whereas like with Supercross hills, some guys were running like 165s, like super short, just to spin real hard, high cadence. With mountain bike, like I run 175s on my dirt jumper, for instance, but I think with like enduro downhill, I think the current trend is 165s. Obviously, I think we touched on this a few episodes ago, but there's a bunch of guys going shorter again, like 150s, like, more the free ride movement. But I think the generic rule of thumb of 165, like I know a lot of enduro guys are on 170s, but I also have a mate who, so Action Sports Medical, so he's like the medical guy for Crankworks and all that, but I think it was his PhD. If it wasn't his PhD, it was like an accompanying someone to do their PhD research, and they did like all this research, data gathering, and outputs on the desired crank length. And basically, their findings concluded that for majority of riding, whether it's like enduro or downhill road cycling, whatever, that like obviously there's a limit, but yeah, like 165s were the way to go from not just a comfort standpoint, but also like, output.
Yeah, that's interesting. I run 170s. Just because.
Yeah, I'm 175.
I don't know. I just like it. Like, I don't like it. The super short cranks makes me, I don't know, it just makes me feel like I'm standing up. Like, it feels real weird. I don't know how to explain it. Whereas
I think like
you get that wider stance.
Anything's rideable. I guess it just depends on, like, obviously there's a bandwidth, but depends on your style and how you sort of tweak it as well to suit. Like, I always find it weird. Like, for instance, like I ride my dirt jumper a fair bit, and I couldn't imagine running anything but 175s. It's just, and same with BMX. Like, I couldn't imagine riding anything but 175s. But it's funny how jump on like my downhill bike with 165s, and it feels just as natural, but they're different. But it feels natural. It's like, I couldn't imagine riding anything sort of but.
That's pretty interesting.
It is.
My crank length thing comes from a really different place, which is my road bike fit. So 172.5 is the best for me. I've got terrible knees. Like my knees are fucked. We could have a whole podcast on my knees. But the crank length meant to runs 172.5. I found 170s was like a little bit too much crank striking in terms of riding trails. So 170 was kind of the better option. But yeah, I tried 165s and they just feel weird to me. Like my feet are too close together. And I don't like it. But yeah, it's not one. But for my knees, 170 is good. I think shorter, the better is generally for knees to an extent. Yeah,
I've never had a bike fit on road, and roadies would like grill me for that because I don't ride a heap of road, but I ride enough to where I should have. But I'm 172.5 as well. The only reason, so I bought some SRAM force cranks for my roadie that are 172.5, and the only reason I did was that the duraces that were on it were 172.5s, and I was like, well, I'll just get the same because I don't ride enough. I haven't ridden enough road to know. But the 172.5s felt all right, so I just got the same.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of biomechanics that goes into that. Like I think if you were to study track cyclists, crank lengths would be a whole different story for sure.
Yeah. And like, track's different and track's different to road and even triathlon's different again. Like, and that, there's a whole thing on that, how fast you pedal. And that's what you were saying, Nick, with BMX, you know what I mean? I think also when you're dealing with something with a static bottom bracket, it's also fine to go changing those lengths a bit. You can go longer and you're not going to strike as much as, say, that dynamic bottom bracket height when you've got a dually.
Well, the other thing too is, which hasn't, well, it might have been researched, I'm just not aware of it, have been researched, is that so there's this, what we're talking about, like the desired crank length or whatever. I have thought it'd be really interesting to overlay that with oval chain rings. Like I've never ridden oval chain rings, but like I understand the maths behind it as to why they're good. And like, I could be way off the mark here, but kind of sticking my head out with it. We're thinking about it for like 2 seconds is that I think that, like the shorter crank length you won't be making such a big compromise by going shorter. So you could be kind of killing two birds with one stone there. But my point is I haven't really seen some quantitative data. Like I've seen some quantitative data behind oval chain rings, like don't get me wrong, but I haven't seen the two overlaid, like the quantitative data about oval chain rings, quantitative data about crank length, and combining the two to say, all right, well, what are our findings here? Because I think that could be really interesting.
Yeah, the oval chain ring things, I'll preface this with I hate oval chain rings from a 2x road setup system. They're just terrible. They don't shift. And I also don't like because you can train your pedal stroke to work in more efficient ways. If you've ever ridden like a watt bike and stuff, you can get that P chart and get pedal going. So I find you're better off working your pedaling technique than you are just slapping on an oval.
And that's what a lot of people say too.
Chain ring. But then at the same, and then the other thing with the ovals is for a lot of people, so someone told me there's certain people who utilize different energy systems better in their bodies and worse. And I don't know what those are, so I'm not pretending I do. But with the oval rings, you can actually wear yourself out faster because you don't get the recovery part of your pedal stroke. So there can actually be a downside to the way they work. This is on a road style system.
Makes complete sense.
Yeah, and then they also can flog out your derailleurs a little bit too because your derailleurs going eat all the time. But anyway, that's a different one.
Yeah, I could just imagine running like an oval chain ring with like alloy jockey wheels and everything. It just being gnarly. Yeah, I don't get the whole oval thing. That's definitely not my kettle of fish.
No, I've tried it on a 1x system, and I probably needed to give it more time. Just wasn't super into it, but I also didn't have an issue with a circular ring. So.
Yeah, look, I'm not gonna wait. Like, I understand kind of the maths behind it and the claims that people make. I haven't personally ridden one, so I'm not gonna sort of weigh in on a heuristical point of view.
Would it work with the center hub?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah, sick.
Just be like one of those little hula dances that you have on your dashboard, just watching the chain, just doing this the whole. That'd be sick.
Be interested to see chain wear and how, because chains wear at different points throughout the chain according to your pedal stroke. Be interesting to see how, if it's more consistent with the oval ring, because it's more of a consistent force going through the chain. If there was data on that, but yeah.
Really interesting.
We'll start wrapping this section up a little bit, but what are 3 tips you'd give to someone that's building their kind of first bike from the frame up?
I'll let you go first, Lockie.
There's 3 things. It took me a while to think about this today.
I didn't even read the sheet today, by the way.
Mate, what is this?
I'm busy.
Took all that time to write it and then just throw it in the bin, mate.
So the first one would be having the right tools. Don't try and build a bike without the right tools.
I'll send you a really good photo of me using the wrong tools the other day.
I think that's really important. I think there are mechanics who do use the wrong tools, but they know what they're doing, so it's not super scary. But if you don't know what you're doing, I think that's imperative. And you know the right tools, go see a professional. I think that's probably the first piece of advice. Because if you've got a really nice frame, you might wreck it pretty quick. The next one is, if you don't have tube-in-tube routing, invest in some Jaguar internal hose damping tube. That stuff's amazing. Don't skimp on it like you get with an OE build. You want to go from cable outlet to cable outlet and have a full length that's actually jammed in there. I think that's the imperative to have a quiet bike. Quiet bikes are the best. And then the other one is to any bearing cover, any bearing, any axle, you want to use Morgan Blue Aquaproof paste, and same on the bottom racket, especially if it's press fit. Just use that. And going back to question 1, if it's a press fit or 0.1, use the right tools.
Yeah, Morgan Blue Aquaproof paste is a lifesaver.
The tub says Aquaproof pasta on it. You can buy it in small tubs. It's just the jam. It's actually a marine grade grease. It's ridiculous, but it will Medina proof your bike. I'm not joking about that. It gets a bit melty in summer. If you put a bit too much in headsets, it can melt out a little bit. Don't put it in bearings that need to spin like a wheel.
I definitely don't. Yeah. They won't spin. It's basically glue.
It's like the next step is glue. Yeah.
You got any tips, Mick? Or
yeah, I do have a couple of tips, because like I try to reinforce them to myself too. Like anytime I build a new bike, because I'm the king of like leaving things to the last minute too, and kind of rushing things. But I like personally, for me, I think the most important thing is leaving enough time to do it right. Like I always try to space out, and I kind of learned this from Dave Habich too, because I remember him saying it to me, and I'm like, that's a really good point. Like literally with the Meta, I left a week block, start of one weekend through the week to the end of the next weekend, like to not want to ride it, so I could like take the time to put it together really. And don't get me wrong, like I could have done it in an afternoon, but if you leave that time, you're not stressed about it, you're not screwing things up, whatever, and you'll get it right. And like for sure there's something you'll forget, like you're like, oh, I have to go buy some more brake hose or like whatever, and it just leaves you that time to not stress about it. So like for me personally, leaving enough time to build it is number one. And then like, and it's all the stuff that comes with that, like you're not rushing, you don't drop a shifter on your down tube or like, you know, just stupid shit like that. Second one, I guess, if we had to do 3, second one, I guess, is if you're doing it yourself, like get a good stand. Like, yeah, I've pieced together too many bikes on the floor and whatever. And like, I've got a good park tool stand, and like, honestly, they make the world of difference. And I've seen so many people like bash bottom brackets and shit in on the shed floor with a hammer, and it's like, fuck, man. Like, you're going to spend 10 grand on a bike, and that's what you're going to do to your bottom bracket. So if you're going to do it yourself, invest in a good stand, or borrow one off your mates, or like one of your mates will have one. Like, you know. The third being is, if you're not going to build it yourself, or you get to a point in the build where you can't do it yourself, is do your due diligence and find a good bike shop. Like, don't go to just some bike shop on the corner, because particularly with like, not just an expensive bike, but I hate the word, but like boutique bike, like chances are, like, let's say if you're building up a downhill bike and you go just to your generic bike shop, chances is, like, and it's not to hang shit on anyone, but chances is they might have only seen one or two downhill bikes in their life. Like, and speaking from experience here, like, I went to a bike shop a few years ago with my downhill bike, and like, I won't get into the smaller details, but basically it was right before a race, and I got sick and I needed it built like in a rush, and because I was sick I couldn't build it. But they did a shithouse job, and like, it was mainly to do with internal routing and stuff. They did a shithouse job and charged through the nose for it, which I just had to redo after the race when I got better anyway. So if you can't do the build yourself, or there's a step in the build that you can't do yourself, ask your mates, whatever, for like a good reputable bike shop that'll actually do a good job, because there are a lot of bike shops out there that will do a shit job, particularly depending on the rarity of the bike.
Oh yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, I wouldn't take, and don't get me wrong, I know a lot of mechanics at bike brand specific stores who are amazing mechanics, but like, even just to get spares as well, right? Like, say it's a common style and you take it to, let's say hypothetically, a Trek store. Okay, their access to common sale parts might be quite limited as well. You know what I mean? So beyond just knowledge. But yeah, I think that's a really good point.
And I also think, like, and I'm kind of this way inclined to, like, not just with bike stuff, but personally, I think that it pays to build your own bikes from ground up, because, I mean, you're going to have to maintain them. So I think, like, if you've built it from the ground up, you know it through and through. Like, you know exactly that you've done that bolt up to whatever. So if you ever have to undo it or put another one in, like, you've done it before, or at least you've seen it before or whatever. But I know, like, maybe I'm just too far that way inclined, but you know, talking about kind of heuristical knowledge before, I feel as though, like, just say with that Meta, like, I know every single bolt on it, because I haven't just bought it from Common Sale and gone out and ridden it. So if something would have come loose or snap or whatever, I'm like, oh, like, yeah, I've put this bolt in, kind of just, yeah, makes me less anxious, put it that way.
I like it.
100%. Yeah. I'm pretty much on the same. As I said, use the right tools, because I'll send you a very interesting photo of me using a shifter spanner and vice grips at the same time. It is.
Oh no!
Actually, well, on that
mechanical engineering,
this is like passed on from my old man, because he's a big one on this. And, like, trust me, I don't follow this to a T as much as I should, but big one is fucking please, like, use sockets wherever you can instead of open enders. Like, if you can ever use a socket, use one, please, because, like, see so many people, like, shifters are real bad, but, like, the open ender instead of sockets, like, that one, yeah, drives me nuts.
Or adjust, like, or just buy, like spend the money and buy a set of Nimpex pliers. Like, I know you can cause damage on those too, because you can compress stuff, but, like, at least they lock into place. You're like, yeah.
Yeah, I think a mechanic friend of mine once said shifters are a multi-tool, and the one thing they don't do is undo nuts. Like, it's the one thing they shit at. Great hammer, great for everything else.
And, like, you know, like, before, like, just on this whole thing, like, I kind of started off the kind of the chat today on this narrative, but in no way am I taking any kind of moral high ground or anything with any of this stuff, because I've certainly learnt the hard way of using all the wrong tools on shit when I was younger. So
I'm in the same boat too. Like all that advice is not me being like I've belted bottom brackets in on floors in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Like I've done the dodgy bearing rebuilds. I've used the wrong tools. I've bought the wrong tools. I've fucked up jobs in bike shops and had to pay to get stuff replaced. Like I only say that because like I've done it, and you'll all experience it at some point. But if you can like learn from some people and try and mitigate some of those, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we've made the mistake so that other people don't have to.
Yeah, man, I've picked up so much stuff. You know what I mean? It's just taking, I think the difference, even now you can stuff stuff. I stuffed up stuff up. I think the difference now is it's just, I take accountability for it and just look at it as learning and not look at it as an ego thing. I think your point, Nick, of taking time, I think it's probably my favorite point. I think that's really good.
Cool. Sweet. I think there's some really good advice in there for everyone. Hopefully everyone takes it on board. We'll blast through this next section pretty quickly, but it's just the hot or not stuff on some of the news. What do you guys think of Richie Rood's disqualification at AWS? Not even TikTok related. Yeah, okay.
I'm obviously number one Moya fan, but I didn't like it. I don't think, I don't know. I just don't think it was, I completely get the cheating, and obviously Richie's got a track record that we won't get into, but I don't know if that really was deserving, but I also don't know what the pre-race talk was. I don't know how much that was defined, and it seems to me from reading about it, everyone was pretty informed about it, and it may have kind of come down to a not listening thing, but yeah, I thought it made it a bit of an anticlimax, but like we all knew Jack was going to win anyway, so it didn't matter at the end of the day. So.
Anything from you, Mick, or are you just multifaceted?
I think it's multifaceted. I think like there's so much that goes into it that it's very easy for sort of bystanders to sit by and be like, and grill it. I'm not in any way condoning it, because I don't think it was necessarily right. For one, I mean, I've seen a lot of people comment and say that, like, if the track's bunted, then why was there flags there anyway that you had to go around? So, yeah, anyway, I'll leave it there.
I think a time penalty is what should have been given, and it would have still made the weekend interesting, and they still would have been fighting, and Richie would have been on the back foot, which I think for him would have been cool to see him under pressure, because he's pretty cool, calm and collected normally. I think that would have made for a better viewing for that weekend's worth of race.
I think to kind of a similar topic, but like just to extend it a little bit. In no way condoning that move. But I think, and normally it's pretty good, but I think like track bunting should be done right.
Yeah.
And not in any way confusing.
And consistency is key, right? Like, language barriers are huge. I don't know if you've probably done races in Europe and stuff. Like you're in the start, you're getting counted down in whatever language, but you know what's going on because of the beeps.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly right. So like I said, like when I saw it, I'm like, well, that's not that great. But at the same time, I'm like, well, why the fuck was there a corridor there that was inside one bunting but outside another? Like, particularly when you're dealing with guys that are racing for a world title, like your adrenaline's so fast. Like, I'm sure I've probably done moves, whether it's BMX or mountain bike or whatever, that are like uncalculated because you're just heading towards the finish line. So I think it's really easy for people to sit by and be like, oh, this, that, or the rest of it. But it's pretty misleading when you've got bunting going fucking everywhere.
100%. I think
it's not like the podcast is called Beyond the Flags.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think from like a race director, like I've been a race director at plenty of races, but I think the main reason behind a DSQ is because it's easier. Like if two people do the same thing and you give penalties out, it's a bit weird. But so I think they would have just been like, yeah, DSQ is the easiest way to.
And my point about like accurate bunting isn't just for the athletes, but it's also for exactly what you said too, for the race directors, because it gives them the power to make an informed call. Because in like an example just like this, like you've got, flags and then bunting. If someone goes between that, like Richie did, it also makes it really hard for the race director to make a call, because like you just said, where do they stand on it? So I almost think that accurate taping doesn't just do the riders a favour, but it also does the directors and all the officials a favour as well.
For sure. All right, another one that I just wanted to point out, for a hot or not thing, was because Lockie put it up actually, but Seminuk's Rampage bike, the session. And that thing is rad because it kind of goes along with today's bike build thing, but downhill bike, Zebs, downhill axis, hybrid thingo. It's all pretty cool.
It had like, I just liked how it showed everything off. Like it showed off like the spindle bolt thing that slows the cranks down. Like, it had a Zeb on it that you could do bastard with. Like, I think it was a really cool build. It wasn't just like a standard dream build. Like, it actually showed you those little intricacies that aren't, like, none of those serve a purpose to SRAM, right? But they're cool to show off. So.
Well, I think the Zeb will serve a purpose to SRAM because people will be like, shit, if Brandon can ride Rampage on a single crown fork, then, you know what I mean? Like, I see so many people buying triple crowns and putting them on enduro bikes, whatever, just to, the colloquial term, like, big dickin'. But, like, you know what I mean? Like, if that dude can go ride Rampage on a single crown Zeb, I don't care who you are, the Zeb will handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, obviously I'm not talking World Cup downhill here. I'm talking about the general consumer, but
yeah. Oh, 100%. Like those Zebs are more than enough for anyone, really. I thought the crank spin bolt was like my favorite little thing.
Yeah.
Like I'd never seen that before. That was really cool.
Yeah, I've only ever seen the dodgy tube method. So
yeah. Or the grips, the grip flange. And last one, because I know you love these bikes, Mick, but the new pole, there was another pole out on the prototype. Did you get to see that?
I actually haven't seen it.
This is why you read the paper, mate.
Too busy making shit. Well, look, I'm not gonna comment on, like, I'm a big fan of their machining and all that, because I reckon like the back end stuff that they've put into it's awesome. And like from someone that manufactures bike parts, I'll, like, hand on heart, never diss anyone that's having a crack at manufacturing their own stuff, because I just think it's unfair. There's personal taste that comes into it. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it, so I really can't make a call. Like pole, traditionally, I've kind of, like, I personally wouldn't buy one, but I'm a big fan of like the narrative behind it. I'm like, yeah, that's respectful. It's cool.
Well, I think that's Lockie's next bike, for sure.
I can't find it. I'll find it and send it later. Yeah, it's not my cup of tea. I don't mean to like hate on them. Like, as a brand, it's really cool, but yeah, it's not my thing. So.
Yeah. I just love I really respect what they're doing in the same way that Mick is. Like, they're just pushing that limit, but I mean, crack cocaine's fun, but it doesn't mean you have to do it.
Aesthetic is a really big thing for me. Like, and it just doesn't follow that line, and that's purely it. Like, there's nothing else bad. It's just an aesthetic thing.
Yeah. All right, cool. So we'll move on to listeners' questions and wrap this up because it's 10 time. From Charlie Petrol again, another great question, but what tricks do you have for poorly routed internal cables?
Take them out and do them again.
Buy a bike with internal like guides.
I suppose I saw that. I wasn't too sure what he meant by it, but I would definitely invest in one of those Park Tool cable magnet things, because if you use those, you're generally less likely to kink the cable from jamming it in. That's what I see a lot at events is someone's gears aren't shifting, and it's because the outer cable is actually kinked in the frame. So yeah, I'd buy one of those kits. If it's like a frame design that's poorly routed, then like get warranty. And I've seen those. I had to run external cables on bikes that should be internal, and that's a whole different thing. But that's usually on Chinese direct to consumer kind of thing.
There's definitely a few brands that have poorly routed ones. On that, like if you can't get, if you can't get like one of those Park Tool internal things, then you have to hack it out. I use fencing wire, like it's this real soft wire, and then you run that through your frame. You pull that out, and then you can fold it in a couple of pieces, put it in the outer, and just pull the outer through. That way, if any damage happens, it's on the fencing wire, and it costs $3 from Bunnings. So that's a cheap trick for you. But the magnet tool, the magnet works on it fine. Like it's sick. But the Park Tool magnet tool is by far one of the best things.
I think also, like on that point, I think it's important to, like if you're buying a frame from scratch and it's say internally routed, instead of just winging it with your fresh bit of hose, like actually, do your homework on the frame to see if there's an easy way to do it. Like for instance, as this prime example, right? So the new metas, like the AMs and the TRs, and like I picked up on it luckily kind of pretty quick. Like I was fucking around with it for maybe like 20 minutes and then picked up on it. But a lot of people didn't realize that so they've got like a plastic skid plate on the down tube, like it's kind of down tube into the bottom bracket. And it just looks like a protection plate, whatever. But if you take that off, there's a little like bung hole underneath in the aluminium. So when you're routing your dropper cable, you can obviously because it's got a big kink there, like it's really, really hard to get. So you can push it straight through, grab it, bend it around, poke it up through the down tube, and then like pull it through. And it's quite easy to do, particularly that way, like when you go down through the seat tube and then the down tube's designed for the cable to come out. But if you were to try to do it, well, for one, if you didn't know the window was there, which a few people have got it through without knowing the window there and have complained about it, and I've said, like, do you know a window's there? And like, mind blown. But yeah, just I guess a little one is, do the homework to see if there's any specific frame design about, like, because a lot are designed to go one way too, like, particularly like how it's ported. It'd be super easy one way and near impossible to do the other.
Yeah, I mean, as a guy that now writes instruction manuals and is directing and working on instruction videos, the amount of work that goes into those to make sure they're as easy as possible for the customer is phenomenal. So they are definitely worth reading. I don't care how long you've been.
Yeah, I probably should have said that as my point, Matt. Like, everyone reading manuals. I still get the manuals out when I service stuff because it changes too, right? Like, it's not a static thing. The manuals now are dynamic and live documents, living documents. Read your manuals.
This is probably my favorite question, but I'll leave it up to you guys. If you've got to buy a new part and you're weighing up weight, durability, and price, what's the most important to you guys?
Durability.
Yeah, durability in terms of hierarchy, durability, weight, price.
Yeah. I'd probably say the same.
I understand price is a big thing for a lot of people, but like, I really value my routing, and I hate stuff getting in the way of that, like shit breaking. So I would prefer to pay more for something that's durable, and then if I can get a little benefit of something being a little bit lighter every here or there, I'm pretty happy. But price is usually the last thing I care about. Durability is key.
And I think it comes back to the very first question about this whole discussion with like having a narrative for your bike, because obviously if you're buying if you're building up an XC bike, for instance, is that you can afford to have less durable parts because you won't be trashing it as much as, say, a downhill bike. So I think it is kind of really important to have a direction with the build so you can spec the parts around that direction.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely think durability and price are so closely related that it's not really a compare thing. Like if you get something that's durable, it's going to save you money in the long run anyway. So
True.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it.
What was that? There was a Gary Fisher line. I can't remember what it was. He used to quote it all the time at the trek store, but it was like light. Oh, it's going to crack me now. There's three things. It was like cheap, light, something. I can't remember what the third one was. And
Strong.
it was like strong. It was like pick two. And it's true. Like you have to pick two in that situation. You can't really have all of them.
Exactly. Yeah. If you do want all of them, one or the other has to grow as well. It's like that triangle.
Yeah.
And last question, so we can wrap it up and we'll get some food. Do you put lube on every metal to metal contact point?
You couldn't have started more. That was the most awkward lube sentence I've ever heard.
I think that might have been the internet. I'm blaming the internet on that one. Do you put lube on every metal to metal contact point on your bike?
That's again, it's a multifaceted question because it depends on what the part is. Like there's some stuff that you want to Loctite, not all parts, obviously. I think it's back to Lockie's point. I think it's important to get out the owner's manual because that should specify like what exactly the bolt. So let's just say it's a bolt, like what exactly they specify to put that on. Like I know Specialized do a really good diagram. They've got like a whole rear end exploded, and it's been a while since I looked at it, but it's got like whole rear end exploded, and it's got something along the lines of like green dots or green arrows or whatever is grease or like lube. Sick. And then like red dots or red arrows for Loctite. And it's like super self-explanatory about which parts need to be lubed, which parts need to be Loctited. Because like say on their Enduro or whatever, they've got like split link and then like two-piece rocker yoke. So like it's fairly complex if you were to break it all down. So I think, going back to the owner's manual is key, but like from not just a bike industry point of view, but from an engineering point of view, is that I think grease and lube just needs to be used more often because I see too many dry bolts being put into dry threads and it makes me real crook.
Yeah, definitely check your manual. Like I was going to say, I can't think of much stuff that goes in dry, but UDH from SRAM does. It needs to go in, and if you grease it up, it'll back itself out, and it's been designed to do that. But yeah, like it's so important to have Loctite on stuff. Like rotor bolts, you know what I mean? Like once you use a rotor bolt once, it needs Loctite on it again. It needs a specific Loctite. It needs to set. Same with derailleur bolts. For the most part, they need a Loctite on them. People take the derailleur on and off and they wonder why the bolt starts to back out. It's super key. Usually if there's not existing little bits of Loctite on there, you know what I mean, like a stem bolt or something, it'll need grease. I'll always grease any metal on metal. And even as much as like internal cables going like route, so in my habit, it's like got a tube and tube with the carbon. I'll even put a little bit of grease on the outside of that cable because I've seen a lot of cables get stuck in frames, like from just dirt and grit getting in. But yeah, just make sure you check your use manual. Bolt prep's great as well. But I do like to have something there so it doesn't seize, whether it be a Loctite or a grease, whatever the manual says. And if not, a bit of grease is good. But give you the right torque reading.
Yeah, for sure. And like it's like I said, it's such a multifaceted thing. And going back to the owner manual's important because like say for instance even like where like aluminium threads into steel, like that's a big one, like because the aluminium, well, not that it does this, but the aluminium will basically chew away the metal because the aluminium won't corrode but the metal will. So like it's that path of least resistance and how it ionizes and all that type of shit. So like the owner's manual should sort of specify all that type of stuff, but that's why it's such a multifaceted thing, because it's like,
it's like with brakes, and I won't get down the rabbit hole because I know everyone wants to eat, but like with tram compression nuts, right? They need dot grease and they need to be torqued to 8 Newton meters of torque. Super important. If you don't put the grease on, the threads will visibly be more threads on that than if there is grease. It's super important. And I see at so many events, people's brakes not working because that bolt's not tight enough. So yeah, make sure you use the right grease and it will give you the right torque rating. And that's steel compression nut going into an alloy brake lever.
Actually, while we're talking about this, I had this thought the other day. I'm going to make it heard here first, but I have a theory. And that theory is that I reckon left-hand trunnion bolt, I know there's a bearing there. I know that.
I know where this is going. I agree.
Left-hand trunnion bolt should be left-hand thread.
Mm.
So I've heard this from someone else. I haven't had any back out. But I do get your point. It's the same with ABP, minnow links on sessions. You see the same thing.
Every pivot bolt on any track.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same, like my common style Supreme, like the left-hand side will come undone. Like on the scissor link, like it doesn't run trunnion, but like on the scissor link, it'll back out. But anyway, that's a whole nother topic. But just think, because like I've heard people. Why I'm saying this, because we're on the Loctite thing, but I've heard people of like Loctiting certain bolt, and I'm like, well, instead of Loctite, because that's fucking stupid in certain scenarios, instead of Loctiting, just make a left-hand thread, problem solved.
I agree. I'm with you on that one.
But then the problem with that is, it would be fine, wouldn't it, if you flipped it? Because, anyway, we'll talk about this later.
Yeah, we'll talk about it another time.
Yeah.
Oh, there was one question from Phil Wood. Is cross-threading the new Loctite?
Yes. Yes.
I love you, Phil. Yeah. Cool. We got through it. That was amazing. Not too many rabbit holes went down. But thanks for taking the time out. Thanks for introducing us to your dog, Lockie. There were plenty of stoked
I didn't really
people.
introduce her. She just kind of demanded chicken, and I had to run around the house for half the podcast. So apologies for any background noise. But she's now currently sleeping.
Good.
And I'm going to take her for a walk so she doesn't wake up in the night and fucking ruin my sleep habits. So.
First puppy, eh?
Oh, dude, it's like I'm never having kids. Like, nah. This is enough, eh?
No, very good.
All right, cool. Thanks
All right,
so
guys.
much, guys.
Okay,
no worries.
Keep in touch. Cheers. Bye.
See you next time.
There we go. So hopefully you got